So welcome back to the book of Ruth. We are now in session 5, Drama in the Dark. Do you like that title? Yeah. When we left our last chapter, we left Ruth under the watchful eye of Boaz gleaning in the fields. And so we as the audience have started to have some hope about the resolution of this story. Now, often when I teach this book live, I challenge my audience to think through and even talk through the emotions that in particular Naomi is experiencing. Because when we first meet Naomi, of course, she's got everything. She's got a husband, she's got 2 healthy sons, life is good. But by the time she returns to Bethlehem, all of that fullness has become emptiness. And honestly, I think when this woman stumbles back into her hometown, she is stumbling back a victim of loss, injury, and probably a diagnosably depressed human being. And so as we walk through chapter 2, we are seeing those emotions in Naomi's life. And it's not until we get to the end of chapter 2, which we just covered last session, that we see Naomi beginning to hope. She's beginning to be able to see a road into her future. She's beginning to see the possibility that there might be some restoration to her injury. And so, like any good Jewish mother-in-law, she begins to scheme to make that happen. So let's pick up the story, the beginning of chapter 3. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? And now is not Boaz our kinsman, with whose maids you are?" What's going on here? A little bit of scheming. Now, typically an American audience, when they're first introduced to Boaz, they're expecting either, Liam Hemsworth or maybe Brad Pitt to walk onto the scene. I have to crush you with the news that he's probably more like Paul Newman on the scene. He's probably an older man, still good looking, he's still got it going, but there's some gray on those temples, and he is a mature man of wealth and status. He's not your young, typical romantic model fellow. But Naomi is looking at him, and she, of course, is seeing a source of security for her daughter-in-law. Now, realize that by the time we get to chapter 3, many weeks have passed. We've gotten through the barley harvest. That took at least 2 weeks. We've gotten through the wheat harvest. That took another 2 weeks. In fact, we could stretch this story to the idea that Ruth has been gleaning with Boaz for as many as 6 weeks. And so we can guess that over those weeks, as she has displayed her good character, that she has slowly moved closer and closer to the young women that she is gleaning with, that conversations have begun, that those lunches under the shelter have resulted in some conversations, perhaps even with the young men who are busy working the harvest, some laughter, some eye contact. It's quite possible by the end of these 6 weeks that even though Ruth is the Moabitess, that the crowd around her has gotten past a lot of their biases, and there might be even a young Liam Hemsworth or older Brad Pitt who's casting a sideways glance at this, I want her to be very cute Moabite. Okay, so as we enter chapter 3, Naomi's got a plan. And the plan, as you noticed, is, "My daughter, shall I not seek rest for you?" Do you remember back in chapter 1 when she told Orpah and Ruth, go home to your mother's house, so that you might find rest in the house of another husband. So when Naomi starts talking about rest, she's talking about marriage, the security of a Beit Av, and heirs. That's what she's talking about. And in this mix, she introduces the idea that Boaz is a kinsman. And of course, as you all know at this point in time, a kinsman's responsibility is to take care of his clan. The closer you are in relationship, the more responsibility a kinsman has for you. And so Naomi is hoping that perhaps Boaz would be willing to welcome them into his household in one fashion or another. And like a good Jewish mother-in-law, she's busy trying to work the marriage alliance. And so this is Naomi's plan. She says, look, he is winnowing barley at the threshing floor tonight. So wash yourself, anoint yourself, put on your not work clothes. Now, she's not putting on a prom dress. She's not dousing herself in Christian Dior perfume. She's just not showing up in a t-shirt and a pair of dirty blue jeans, okay? Go down to the threshing floor and do not make yourself known to the man until he is finished eating and drinking. And it shall be, when he lies down, you pay attention to where he lays down, and go and uncover his feet. And as you look at the screen, you're looking at the Hebrew word margalothav. That's not a word I expect you to learn to pronounce, but it is what is in the text for his feet. Uncover his feet, and then he will tell you what to do. Now, what do you think of Naomi's instructions here? Yeah? Be honest. Get yourself cleaned up. Get yourself dressed up. Head out to the edge of town. Head out to the edge of town after dark by yourself in a patriarchal tribal culture. Seek out a context where there are only men, only drunken men, and make yourself as vulnerable as you possibly can. Whoa. This is her mother-in-law talking to her. What do you think of these instructions? Well, I don't know about you, but I'm reminded of a Reba McEntire country song. Yes, I do listen to country music. It's true. It's true. And the song is called Fancy. Have you ever heard it? And it's a story about a single mother who's reached the end of her rope and the end of her resources. She's sick, she has a baby on her hip, and she's got a young adolescent daughter. And she spends her last dime buying a fancy red dress for her adolescent daughter, dressing her up, putting her first lipstick on, and shoving her out the door. And as her confused teenage daughter says, "Mama, what are you doing?" Her mom says to her, "Fancy, I'm sick. The baby's going to starve to death. You just be nice to the gentleman, and they'll be nice to you." It's a heartbreaking song. And unfortunately, it's a heartbreaking story that gets repeated all over this world on a regular basis. In fact, there's a lot of stuff out there in the literature that reads this chapter of the book of Ruth as that chapter in a desperate family's life where the only thing they have left to sell is the sexual value of their adolescent daughter. And this happens over and over again in our real world. Is that what's happening in chapter 3 of the book of Ruth? There are a lot of my colleagues who would say, yes, that is what's happening. I'm going to argue that there's something else going on. All right, so let's circle back and talk for a minute about that threshing floor. The threshing floor has been a place of work for weeks. The entire community has been gathered around this harvest. We've already been through the idea of gathering the sheaves, getting the grain out of them, getting the grain cleaned up and piled up. We're at the end of the harvest process. And there are many messages that come with the fact that we're at the end of the harvest process. One message is that tonight, this night, we have more than enough. And in a subsistence economy, that's a big deal. Everyone knows that come the end of winter, we're not going to have enough. But tonight, we got all we could possibly want. Tonight is a night that we feast. So this is what's going on at the threshing floor. And they've had a party, and there's been a feast, and there's been lots of wine. And everybody goes home except for the assigned men. And the assigned men stay at the threshing floor because at this point in time, we have piled all of that grain in the middle of the floor, and it has not yet been moved into storage. When it gets moved into storage, we know it's safe, and we know we'll have it through the winter. But right now, tonight, it's out in the open, and we've got to make sure that it's not ravaged, right? So what they will do is they'll pile all the grain in the middle, they'll assign a certain number of men, and they'll spend the night guarding the grain. In fact, there's a practice where they would take like a big branding iron and stick it into the side of the pile of grain so that they could tell in the morning if anyone had come and pilfered some of the grain. So Boaz, once again, this man of business that we respect, has not only assigned certain men to spend the night there, he has chosen to be one of them. And once again, we're looking at our Boaz and saying, this is a good man. So as we turn the page on our story, we hear that Ruth has received her instructions being that she is to go to the threshing floor, and she responds to her mother-in-law with a line that still stuns me to this day. All that you say I will do. Now, is Ruth a courageous young woman? Say yes. Yes. Did Ruth leave her family in order to take care of Naomi? Yes. Did she leave her family, her neighborhood, her high school, everything that was familiar because of her own commitments to what integrity looks like? Yes. And yet this young woman turns to her mother-in-law, who's just given her the Reba McEntire instructions to life, and she says, yes. Everything you say, I will do. This intrigues me. You need to talk about this in your groups at some point in time, at what is going through Ruth's mind. So Ruth went down to the threshing floor, and she did according to all that her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, yes, there is real wine in the Bible. Hope that's not a shock to you. And his heart was merry, so he's got at least a little bit of a buzz on. He went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, and she came secretly, so she sneaks in after dark, after everybody's asleep, and she uncovers his feet, and she lays down. Now, what is that business about uncovering feet? Why did I want you to hear the Hebrew word, the maragloth, instead of the maraglayim? What is that about? Well, guys, big news, the word foot in Hebrew is a euphemism. And it's a euphemism for private parts. Yes, it is. So your narrator has pulled you right to the edge of your seat and has asked you the question, exactly what is Ruth uncovering? Well, if she is uncovering private parts, we would expect the maraglayim form. But instead, she's uncovering maragloth. And you, the reader, are going, where are you going with this story? Just like any great movie director would get you right to the edge, what are they going to do? Are we to anticipate that steamy scene of compromised integrity? Are we to anticipate that this young woman in her desperation is going to use all of her seductive measures to leverage a man of good reputation at his weakest moment? Has she snuck out, found him when he's compromised, snuggled up next to him, and is going to invite him to do what she knows his own integrity would demand he doesn't do? Is that where we're headed? Or are we headed to that desperate young woman whose mother-in-law has sent her out, knowing that any man in this position is going to do just what you would expect? Is that where we're headed? Or is not where we're headed? Are they actually the people of Chayil that we've been told throughout the story that they are? If so, how in the world can this scene turn out in a fashion that we can tell it to our 6-year-olds? Okay, so here we are, far from town, after much feasting and drinking in the dark, and scandal is in the air. No one can see them. No one would blame them. Is this where we're headed? And we turn the page, and we read, and Boaz awakens. And so it happened in the middle of the night that the man was startled. Yeah. And he bent forward, and behold, a woman was lying at his feet. One time I was teaching this to a men's group, and I asked them, what do you guys think Boaz is thinking at this moment? And, one of them said this, one of them said the other, and then a very honest man said, what did I do last night? Exactly how much wine did I actually drink? A woman is lying at his feet. And he said, classic question, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your maidservant. Spread the wing of your garment. The Hebrew there is kanaf. So the wing of your garment is like the flap of your coat or the flap of your cloak. Spread the wing of your garment over your maid, for you are a close relative, which translates in Ruth's world into you are a redeemer. All right, so many things we're asking at this point. One, what the heck is Boaz thinking? And two, what the heck is Ruth thinking? But three, what is she actually asking? Is she asking for a steamy scene? Is she asking to get some sort of advantage, to get her out of her currently still desperate situation? Yes, she and Naomi have had grain for weeks, but this is a temporary fix. We are still two widows in crisis. Well, there are two things going on here that I want you to notice. One, I want you to notice the language she chooses. Spread the wing of your garment over your maid. Have you heard something about wings somewhere else in this curriculum? And I see some heads nodding. Yes, you have. Because way back in the first scene, when Boaz met Ruth, and he saw that foreign girl he didn't recognize out in his field, and he asked his foreman, who is that girl? And his foreman said, that's Ruth the Moabitess. No, actually, the foreman said, that's the Moabitess, Naomi's kin. And so when Boaz greeted her, he said, may Yahweh, and he names his God, may Yahweh repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by Yahweh, the God of Israel. This guy's an evangelist. Under whose wings, kanaf, same word, you have come to take refuge. So, you know what I hear in Ruth's question? Boaz, put your money where your mouth is. You said be warm and well fed. Well, here I am, and I'm cold and I'm hungry. What are you going to do about it? So one thing that Ruth is doing is she's asking Boaz to be the vehicle by which Yahweh spreads his wings over Ruth. And I love that. And as a Christian, I love that. Because as a Christian, I realize that my God acts in this world through me. And if I am not kind, and if I am not generous, and if I am not a person of good reputation, then those who do not yet know my God will judge my God based on my behavior. And so I love that about this question. She's saying to Boaz, be who you say your God is, and spread your wing over me. That's one thing she's saying. The other thing she's saying is she is tapping into ancient Near Eastern metaphor, which I can show you in 1,000 marriage and divorce documents coming out of the world of Mesopotamia. You see, when a man marries a woman, oh, that's what she's doing. When a man marries a woman in the ancient world, he speaks of covering her with the wing of his garments. Ruth is proposing. That's what she's doing. Now, even in my world, it's kind of a big deal when the girl actually pops the question. Can you imagine in her world? She shows up in the middle of the night and she proposes. That's what she's doing. She's not asking for a steamy scene. She's not trying to manipulate and seduce. She is actually proposing marriage. And she's proposing marriage based on the fact that he is a near relative, and he knows and she knows that Naomi needs a beit av. That's really where Ruth is headed here. Naomi is an old woman. She's a widow and she's lost her sons. I, Ruth, am the only thing she's got left. The only way this woman's going to get a beit av around her is if I get her one. And you, Boaz, are my choice. Will you marry me? So all of a sudden, I'm looking at this Ruth and I'm saying, yeah, you are that courageous young woman I met in the first chapter. In fact, you're tough as nails. In fact, you're scaring me, girl. Yeah, you are. And so Ruth proposes and Boaz answers. Now, I'm going to guess that Boaz is still just a little bit taken aback by this whole set of circumstances. I mean, how many guys get proposed to? How many guys get proposed to on the threshing floor? How many guys get proposed to in the middle of the night by a cute young thing who fell asleep at his feet? Okay, so I'm going to guess he might not be on top of his game as he might have been, in a regular conference kind of meeting. But he responds beautifully. May Yahweh bless you, my daughter. Again, these are words of respect. When he speaks of her as a daughter, he's not recognizing her as a relative. He's recognizing her as a younger woman who deserves a title of respect. May Yahweh bless you, my daughter, he replies. This kindness, and this is this word chesed again, that keeps popping up in your Old Testament. Chesed literally is translated as faithfulness, covenant faithfulness. In fact, your Bibles are full of testimonies about how God has shown covenant faithfulness, chesed, to his people. And so Boaz says it to her. This chesed, this kindness, is greater than that which you showed earlier. This second kindness is even greater than your first kindness. You have not run after the younger men. That would be the cute young things under the shade cloth at lunch, is what I'm thinking. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask. All my fellow townspeople know that you are a woman, and in my Bible it translates noble character. It would be fun for you to look and see how your different translations actually work with that phrase. What it literally says is Esheth Chayil. And Esheth Chayil is the phrase, a woman of this noble character, this strength. And there are only 3 places that this phrase shows up in your entire Bible. One is right here, where Boaz, the godliest man we've met so far, applies it to the Moabitess. And the other 2 places are in Proverbs. Proverbs, where the wise man speaks to the young man, and he says to him, if you are able, do your very best to find yourself an Eshet Chayil. Proverbs 12:4, because an Eshet Chayil, an excellent wife, is the crown of her husband. And Proverbs 31:10, an Eshet Chayil, an excellent wife, who can find? So Boaz has looked at this young woman and he's not seen a seductress. He has not seen fancy in her red dress. He has not seen a teenage girl forced into prostitution. He has looked at this young woman and seen a woman of character, and he has treated her accordingly. What about this first and second act of kindness? Well, according to Catherine Doob-Sackenfeld, who wrote the commentary on the book of Ruth a generation ago, she would claim that the first act of chesed was when Ruth came back with Naomi in the first place. It would have been such an easier choice to kiss, hug, say goodbye, and stay home. And instead, Ruth made the hard choice of leaving everything that was familiar, because she wasn't going to let this woman go home alone. She wasn't going to let Naomi travel that long, dark road without anyone. And she wasn't going to let her face the reconstruction of her broken life without help. This is the first act of kindness, and a great act of courage it was. The second act of kindness is this one. And Boaz clarifies why it's such an act of kindness. The implication here is that Ruth had other choices. You have not gone after the younger men, whether rich or poor. You haven't gone after the guy who just slew you with his chemistry, or the guy who had his promising young upstart software design company. You have gone after me, an older man, me, a man who respects you, and me who will find a place at my table if it kills me. But you have chosen not simply for your own good, you've chosen for the good of Naomi as well. And I can tell you, in the Hebrew mind, I've told you this before, Naomi really is the central character of this book. And so, Ruth's proposal succeeds. But even though she succeeds with Boaz, what she might not realize is what she is asked for is a little more complicated than just a marriage proposal. And so Boaz responds, although it is true that I am near of kin, literally, I have the right to redeem. There is a redeemer nearer than I. Now, you remember from our first lesson together that to redeem in this scenario is to buy back. There is the redemption of Naomi and Ruth, but there's another redemption in the mix that Ruth probably hasn't thought about. And that's the fact that Elimelech's land is still unclaimed. And I can tell you that the businessmen in Bethlehem have about this much interest in Ruth, even less in Naomi, and a whole bunch of interest in Elimelech's land. So Boaz says, it's true that I'm near of kin, but there's a man who stands closer and has a better right to redeem than I. So you stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem, good. We'll let him redeem. But if he is not willing, as surely as Yahweh lives. This is an oath, and this is a binding oath. When I teach my Hebrew students, here it is. Here's your oath sequence. As surely as Yahweh lives, I will do it. You lie here until morning. So Boaz realizes that there's some legal stuff in the mix. Legal stuff that her request has brought to the surface. And he has, of course, realized that there is land in the mix. And this might be a little more complicated than Ruth expects. So the passage goes on to say that she lay at his feet until morning and rose before one could recognize the other. In other words, that early shadow of pre-dawn. And Boaz said to the men at the harvest floor, let it not be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. This sounds so benign in the biblical text. I'm seeing Boaz step up in front of his men with every ounce of authority and intimidation he has as the CEO of this small village and say, gentlemen, do you like your jobs? Would you like to be employed on Monday morning? Do you have any anticipation of ever being able to get a job in this town? There was no girl here. You've seen nothing. And again, he said to Ruth, give me your cloak. And into her cloak, he measured out 6 measures of barley, laid it upon her, and she went into the city. In other words, even at this moment, Boaz is concerned for Naomi and sends Ruth back to her mother-in-law with a gift. When she arrives home, she comes into her mother-in-law, who I'm going to guess sat up all night trying to figure out what was going on. And Naomi jumps to her feet and says, how did it go, my daughter? And Ruth told her all that the man had done for her. And she said, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me for you. He said, don't go to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Do you remember what Naomi said to the village woman when she came home? I went out full, I came back empty. And Boaz is making sure that she's not empty. Then she said, wait, my daughter, until you know how this matter turns out. For that man will not rest, we got the rest word again, until he has settled it today. So for your launch question, are you ready? Here we go. The entire story of Ruth is wrapped up in the concept of redemption. A word that finds itself all over the Bible and all over church speak. How are you coming to understand this word in a new way? And how is that impacting your read of the mission of the church?